My name is Claire Whitfield, and 3 days before my sister's wedding, I stood at the back entrance of my own restaurant, listening to her tell 40 people that I was the family disappointment. I want to back up, though, because none of this makes sense without a little history. Growing up, my sister Nora was the golden child. Straight A's, homecoming queen, the kind of daughter my mother introduced at parties before she introduced anyone else. I was the quiet one, the one who liked being in the kitchen instead of the living room. When I told my parents at 19 that I wanted to go to culinary school instead of college, my mother actually laughed. She said, and I remember this word for word, "You're going to spend your life smelling like grease while your sister runs a law firm." I didn't argue. I just left. I moved 4 states away, worked 18-hour days in kitchens that made me cry from exhaustion, and slowly, quietly built something. Not a grease-stained diner, a restaurant. My restaurant. A 22-table place downtown called Larkspur that took me 9 years, 3 investors, and every ounce of stubbornness I had to open. Here's the part that matters. I never told my family I owned it. I told them I worked in restaurant management. That was true, technically. It was also the understatement of the century. Why did I hide it? Honestly, at first it wasn't even a decision. My parents never asked follow-up questions about my life, so I never had to explain it. Later, it became something else, a kind of test. I wanted to see if they'd ever be curious enough to actually ask. They never did. So when Nora got engaged to a man named Preston, whose family apparently owned half of the vineyards in the county, my mother's excitement reached a new gear entirely. Every phone call became about the wedding, the venue, the florist, the very tasteful seating chart that conveniently placed me at a table near the kitchen door, since you'd probably feel more comfortable there. I laughed when I read that text. I didn't say anything back. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Nora called me in a slight panic. The restaurant she'd booked for the rehearsal dinner, someplace called Larkspur, apparently very hard to get into, had confirmed the reservation, but she wanted me to help supervise that night since I knew about that kind of thing. She said it exactly like that, like I was staff, like I was help. I said sure. I didn't tell her I owned the place. I wanted to see what would happen. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I stood near the host stand, in a simple black dress, watching my own restaurant fill up with people who had no idea who I was to them and who I was to that building. My general manager, Theo, gave me a look like, "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. I wanted this moment. Nora arrived glowing, Preston at her side, and my mother, trailing behind in a champagne-colored dress, already telling anyone who'd listen how exclusive this restaurant was, how hard it had been to book, how her daughter clearly had impeccable taste. Dinner went fine for about an hour, wine flowed, toasts were sweet, and then Preston's uncle, a booming, slightly drunk man named Gerald, asked me, completely innocently, what I did for work. Before I could answer, Nora laughed. Not a warm laugh, a performance laugh, the kind meant to be heard by the whole table. "Claire? Oh, she works in restaurants, like serving tables, that kind of thing. It's fine. Not everyone can be a lawyer." She patted my hand like she was comforting a child. We love her anyway. The table chuckled. My mother didn't correct her. If anything, she nodded along, like this was simply an accepted fact about me, something everyone already understood. I felt my face go hot, but not from embarrassment, from something closer to disbelief. I had built this room. Every light fixture, every plate, every recipe on that menu, I had fought for years to make this place real, and my own sister was using it as a punchline about my failure, without knowing she was standing in the middle of my life's work. I could have let it go. Honestly, some version of me, the 19-year-old who left home quietly, might have just smiled and said nothing, like always. But I didn't. I set my wine glass down and said calmly, "Actually, I don't serve tables here." Nora blinked. "What?" "I own this restaurant," I said. "Larkspur is mine. Has been for 6 years." The table went quiet in that specific way tables go quiet when something shifts beneath the surface of a conversation. Gerald's eyebrows shot up. Preston actually smiled, delighted, like this was the best plot twist he'd heard all year. My mother's face did something complicated. A flicker of confusion, then embarrassment, then unmistakably calculation. She was already recalculating how to talk about me at future parties. Nora just stared at me. "That's not... You never said..." "You never asked," I said simply. "You've never asked me one real question about my life in 9 years. You just decided who I was and repeated it at dinner parties." "Theo, ever the professional, chose that exact moment to walk over and say, warmly, "Everything all right over here, chef?" Just to press the point home, gently, without cruelty. The whole table heard it. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I actually finished my glass of wine, stood, straightened my dress, and walked to the kitchen to check on the next course, because that's genuinely part of my job, and because I needed a minute alone. The rest of the dinner was strange and quiet in a new way. My mother tried twice to pull me aside to talk, but I told her I was working and had a restaurant to run, which was true, which had always been true. Nora texted me at midnight. Not an apology exactly, more like an olive branch wrapped in confusion. She asked why I never told her. I texted back honestly, because I wanted to know if you'd ever see me without me having to prove it first. You didn't, not until tonight. She didn't have a response to that. The wedding itself, 2 days later, was beautiful. I went. I smiled in photos. I didn't make a scene, because that was never the point. The point wasn't revenge, not really. It was simply the truth, finally standing in the room instead of hiding in the kitchen. My mother has since told approximately everyone she knows that her daughter owns a very exclusive restaurant downtown, as though this was always common knowledge, as though she'd always believed in me. I let her have that. Some people rewrite the story instead of admitting they never asked to hear it in the first place. Nora and I are still working on things. Slowly. She's asked more real questions in the last few weeks than she has in the last 9 years combined, which is either progress or guilt, or maybe both. I try not to keep score. But every time I walk into Larkspur now, past the same host stand where I stood that night in my black dress, I remember exactly how it felt to finally stop being small in a room I built with my own hands. They had no idea who I really was. Now they do.